Hello, welcome to Podfic Galore. I'm your horrible online reader, Grossgasteiger. I read out loud fanfictions for you busy bees, free of charge and no strings attached. Today I will continue reading the Silmarillion/Lord of the Rings fic by Bloodwing Blackbird from Archive of Our Own, called And Now Each Night I Count the Stars, Chapter 3. I hope you can at least try to enjoy my voice, and I will try my best for you with the equipment available to me. Note, this fic is rated explicit. On with the show. And now, each night I count the stars. Chapter 3. Eberhard remained in Rivendell for a week, basking in the rare luxury of a real bed, of food he hadn't had to forage for himself, of walking quiet, well-trod paths without a pack on his back and a glance over his shoulder. He sat outside in the gentle air of the valley and watched the friendly stars, while songs rose everywhere around him, and, on his last night there, thought it something of a wonder that anyone ever found the will to leave. Still, he found himself arising early and gathering his things. Rest was kind, but it was good also to have a task. Aragorn had already set out the previous day, traveling south to the Gap of Rohan to continue his search for the creature. For his part, Eberhard was to travel back to the Shire, maintaining the watch on the borders of the Quiet Land. He had also agreed to play messenger for Elrond. In a leather pouch, he bore sealed letters from Elrond to the others of his council, a call for their aid, for their wisdom. Elrond did not call it a trial, but Eberhard thought it silly to pretend it was anything else. He checked his pack again as dawn was spilling pink over the eastern fence of the mountains. "Are you always so slow to rise, Dunedain?" Eberhard winced at the sharp words and squinted at the dark figure on the path. He had not seen Maeder at all since the day of his arrival. He had not been present at meals, had not appeared in the Hall of Fire on a night of songs and tales. He took in the pack on his back and the stave in his hand, and formed a sudden and terrible premonition of what Maeder intended. "It is bare dawn, friend, and no concern of yours," Eberhard replied, making a mighty effort to keep his voice mild. Maeder did not trouble himself, replying with a grunt, "I will go mad if I remain here, and I may only leave this place in your company. Permit me to travel with you." He stopped himself and sighed. "Please," he added, as if the courtesy pained him, but when Eberhard looked at him, he dropped his gaze and clenched his fists. Eberhard thought he would likely regret it, but there was something in the way those uncanny eyes shied from his own, in the barely hidden desperation behind the words that gave him pause. "Have you spoken to Elrond of this plan?" "Of course. You may be surprised, sir, but this was not my preferred option." Eberhard's sympathy disappeared, quick as a hare in the underbrush. Maeder went on. "I thought to live with the son of Arathorn yesterday, but he refused me. Whatever he is seeking, he does not wish for me to be there if he should chance to find it." He cut his eyes sharply to the doorway behind Eberhard. "Truly, his caution is scandalous." Elrond stepped over the threshold and stopped beside Eberhard, who found himself in a somewhat awkward position of looming over the Lord of Rivendell. He tried to slouch without looking like he was trying. Maeder narrowed his eyes. "You are doing our house a great favor, Eberhard, son of Eberhard," Elrond continued, ignoring the tension. "I shall not forget it." Elrond returned his attention to Maeder. "I had hoped that we two would have the chance to speak more before you decided to disappear again. Oh well." Eberhard pretended to be very interested in an early goldfinch. "What would you have me say? I am no interested in your pardon. Perhaps there were things I wished to say to you." Maeder had been right. Eberhard should have left earlier. Elrond went on. "Perhaps I should not be surprised. You've had more than an age to seek me out if you wish to do so." Eberhard felt trapped between the two, inconsequential but intrusive, like a piece of grit behind the teeth. It was Maeder who broke the spell. Without a word, he turned away and stalked off towards the still dark west. behind him, Elrond sighed. Good journey to you, Halbarad. Please return with him before March comes to an end. I will make sure of it. Elrond inclined his head. I'm in your debt. Halbarad did not know how to respond, so he only nodded and followed Makler from the valley. He caught up to the elf near the crossing of the Bruinen. Truth to be told, he had taken his time on the way, none too eager to rejoin his unwilling companion. With absolutely no regard for Halbarad's wishes, Makler had seated himself on a stone and waited, as if he were carved from it. Halbarad was suddenly angry for reasons he couldn't put a name to. I do not understand you, he said to Makler, who merely watched him with the sort of detached interest that one might give to someone else's misbehaving child. I'm not surprised. Halbarad ignored this. You've been shown far more mercy, far more kindness than you have reason to expect. I expect neither. Halbarad stared at him. I hope you also don't expect my trust. Aragorn may have agreed to watch over you, and I will let you follow me for his sake, but do not think that we are friends, and do not think that I will sleep easy with you in my camp. Makler snorted. If you think you are a threat to me, man, then you truly do not understand who I am. I had heard that the sons of Fëanor were cruel and proud. Perhaps I should have believed those tales before I agreed to your company. So, Halbarad Dunadan does not like me. It would appear that we have something in common. A raw grin, a parody of a smile, creased Makler's face. Perhaps we will get along tolerably after all. It was a game. Makler was toying with him, seeking some amusement in goading him. Well, Halbarad was not interested in being anyone's plaything. He walked on, leaving Makler sitting upon his stone. The first few days were rather unpleasant. Halbarad couldn't think of much beyond the silence that stretched long and tense between him and his companion. Meals in their camp were a silent affair. Makler didn't ask what they were doing, where they were going, or anything else at all, which was a relief, after a fashion. Or would have been if Makler had seen fit to speak to him at all. Halbarad was hardly verbose at the best of times, but there was a definite difference between a quiet comrade and a sullen shadow. After 3 nights of this, Makler shouldered him out of the way at the fire. You're burning it. Again. And that was how Makler had become their cook. Halbarad had not given much thought to elvish diets before, and despite the time he had just spent at the house of Elrond, it was hard to shake the childish notion that they subsisted on songs and sunbeams. As it transpired, he was good at it, which Halbarad decided to treat as a personal affront, and therefore decided it was only fair that Makler should carry the pots. After a few more days, Halbarad was forced to confess that Makler was not as disastrous a companion as he had expected. In addition to the altogether unexpected knack for camp cookery, he showed the sort of skill at woodcraft that must have taken a lifetime to amass, traps and snares that Halbarad had never seen, an exhaustive knowledge of edible and useful plants. Now that he had broken his silence, he still didn't speak overmuch, but Halbarad thought that his earlier culinary misconception was not entirely untrue, for whenever they rested, Makler's harp would be in his hands, and he would play gently, almost without a thought, as if it were much as part of him as his breath. He did not sing, and Halbarad asked for no songs, even if he did find himself watching Makler as he played. Little else changed. Halbarad did their hunting, and Makler picked the little ash berries to flavor their stews, and dug starchy roots from plants that Halbarad had never looked twice at beyond cursing their burrs in the fall. It would have been an exaggeration, perhaps, to say that his feelings towards Makler warmed, but his companionship no longer set Halbarad's teeth on edge, and he no longer startled when he looked back to see Makler trailing after him like a shadow. They still didn't speak much beyond those times when it was necessary. The messages from Elrond were easily delivered. They found Radagast near Saren Ford, and entrusted him with the summons for Gandalf. For Círdan, they were lucky enough to encounter a party of elves who were making for the havens. Maeder disappeared, leaving Halbarad to pass the letter into their keeping. Halbarad considered it a bit of good fortune, for Maeder had flatly refused to approach the havens, and Halbarad only barely trusted Maeder enough not to sleep with his knife near to hand. Their task discharged, they returned to the familiar, for Halbarad, toil of watching and waiting. Little moved in a while that winter, but enough that Halbarad came to be glad of his companion. Though armed only with Halbarad's bow and sword, and Maeder's staff and knife, they drove off a band of orcs at the foothills of the Blue Mountains, and played escort to a group of dwarves travelling to Bree. They waylaid a troll in the Ettenmoors, and spent a wakeful night in the Downs with a pack of wargs stalking just beyond the light of their fire. Maeder moved with a strange beauty when he fought, a dance to music unheard, and once, when Halbarad had run out of arrows and had his sword knocked from his hand, Maeder had leapt before him and slain the orc with only his short belt knife, and a song murmured low in his enemy's ear. Halbarad began to sleep more soundly. They camped in fields, in the shadows of hills, beside rivers. The borders of Shire were quiet, as the woods and waters slept the winter away. When they had enough of the cold, they would visit an inn, the Green Dragon of the Easter Farthing maybe, or the Prancing Pony, where Maeder would pay for their lodging. Halbarad found it strange that his companion did not attract more notice, for even if one could ignore his uncanny eyes, the scent of ages past clung heavily to Maeder. The folks of the villages paid him no more heed than they would have given any other wandering bard. Halbarad credited it to some nebulous concept of elf magic, and resigned himself to ignorance on the subject. On one night, they had made their camp beneath an old oak that spread his branches wide in the centre of a fallow field. As on many nights, Maeder plucked aimlessly at his instrument, while Halbarad sat at ease listening to the fragments of song while he watched the stars. He pulled out his little pouch of weed and began to fill his pipe. He was just striking light to the leaf when he felt Maeder's gaze upon him. He had often felt the elves' attention on him as they walked, as if he were some sort of calculation that Maeder was trying to figure, but the scrutiny had always slid away as soon as he became aware of it. This time, though, it rested upon him, and Halbarad found that it was not entirely unpleasant to be looked at so. He puffed vigorously at his pipe until the leaf caught, then tossed the twig back into the fire, and sat back with an exaggerated sigh of contentment. With a sideways glance at the elf, he exhaled a series of smoke rings, watching them dissipate into the night. Maeder watched this whole operation with naked interest. "Why do you smoke?" he asked. "Why? Well, it becomes a habit after a time. I think I picked it up from my father. The smell makes me think of him." Maeder's mouth twisted a bit at that, but the expression was quickly hidden away. Halbarad could feel the silence trying to settle over them, and felt that he didn't want that. "Have you ever smoked?" Maeder shook his head, and Halbarad began to search his back for his old pipe. It was a short-stemmed clay thing with a crack in the bowl, one of which he had replaced years ago, but had not had the heart to get rid of it. He filled it with pipeweed, and offered it to Maeder, who considered the offer for a moment, then rose, stepping across the fire to take a seat next to the ranger. He held the pipe awkwardly, accepting the lit brand that Halbarad passed him. Halbarad watched as Maeder attempted to kindle his pipe. "Like this?" he asked, sucking air through the pipe stem, his face briefly lightened by the flame with each pull. "That's it." Maeder sat back and inhaled deeply, then lurched forward, coughing. Halbarad laughed, earning himself an indignant look from the elf, but it was hard to find him threatening when he was gasping like a caught fish. "Oh, I'm sorry," Halbarad said. "I should have warned you. Don't breathe it all the way in until you get used to it. Just hold the smoke in your mouth." Maeder repeated the procedure more gently, then blew out a mouthful of smoke, watching it ascend, a bright cloud in the firelight. "Yes, like that." He watched Maeder for a moment, his sharp features softened a little by the firelight. "You know, I don't think I've ever seen an elf smoke before." Maeder slid his eyes over to Halbarad, returning the gaze. It occurred to him that Maeder was not much like any of the elves that he had met. Whatever the moment they had stumbled into past then, as Maeder abruptly stood and offered the pipe back to Halbarad. "No, You can keep it. Maeder nodded and returned to the other side of the fire, where he took up his harp and began to play in earnest, puffing occasionally at the pipe which he held clamped between his teeth. The melody was familiar to Eberhard, one that he had heard often in Rivendell, a lament of the West. He supposed that meant that their conversation was over. The winter wore on in this fashion. The end of February brought with it the first hint of spring, for the rivers swelled with melting snow and the roads became a mire. Though it was warmer, traveling became wetter. March arrived, and with it the very first signs of returning vigor. Waterfowl stirred in the skies, and the bravest of trees began to sport small unopened buds at the tips of their branches. After a day of rain that had all the travellers miserable and sodden, they came upon a farmer, his wagon bogged down in the thick mud in the road, the draft horse sweating in her harness, head down. "Ho, sirs!" he called out as they approached. "I don't suppose you're headed for Archet." Eberhard had no destination planned beyond the vague intention to pass through the Chetwood, and perhaps avoid the worst of the mud. Maeder had yet to express a preference. "We could be, friend," replied Eberhard, already taken off his pack. "What's gone wrong here?" Well, the vein stuck in the mud, as you see. As if that weren't trouble enough for a lifetime, old Daffodil's gone lame." Maeder pushed back his hood and went to the horse, reaching for her bridle. "Careful, lad, she's a biter," called the farmer. Maeder paid no heed. He leaned close and stroked her nose, speaking softly. She calmed, nosing at his garments as if hoping for a treat. With that, they had her out of the harness and out of the way quickly. At another word from Maeder, she stood quietly in the grass at the side of the road. Eberhard and the farmer exchanged a look. "Nice trick that," the farmer commented. "All right, there's a meal and a nice dry corner of the barn in it for you if you help me with the rest of this mess." Eberhard thought that they had already crossed the threshold of how muddy one could get, but he learned his mistake quickly. Maeder spent a good part of the next hour crawling beneath the wagon to wedge rocks beneath the wheels, while Eberhard and the farmer pushed and rocked at the load until it was free. While the farmer checked over his wagon and cargo, Maeder went back to the horse, crooning soft encouraging sounds at the old mare while he ran his hands up her legs, finding that she was favoring one of her front hooves. He cleared the mud from the hoof with his fingers, flinging it to the road with a sharp slop. "She's thrown a shoe," he announced. "But she seems hale otherwise. All will be well after a trip to the farrier." "Oh, there's another stroke of bad luck, then. Old women did not last out the winter. I'll have to see if I can get someone out of Bree." Maeder held Daffodil's hoof between his thighs, prying out a loose nail with his dagger. "Is the forge well kept?" He pulled off one of his scarves and wrapped it around the hoof. "Aye, it's not been gone so long. Why?" "I have some small skill as a smith. Enough for this, at least." Maeder stood and wiped his gloved hands on his pants as if they were any cleaner, then patted Daffodil's flank. "Truly?" the farmer said. Eberhard shared his incredulity at the offer, though not at the skill. Eberhard had heard a few more stories about Feanor and his kin. "That would be a help indeed. I don't suppose you could see your way on staying on for a bit? I know I'm not the only one with a bit of repair work that needs to be doing before the spring planting. We can't pay much, mind, but I'll feed you, give you both a place to wash up and to sleep." The farmer and Maeder turned to look at Eberhard. He felt as if he had barely kept up with the conversation. "I'm sorry," he addressed the farmer. "We've got an appointment to keep." Maeder gave him a look. "Do you think that I have forgotten? We can spare a week here." He looked back to the horse, who was nosing at his neck. "We stay." "We'd be right grateful for you both." Eberhard sighed. "Very well, 1 week." The farmer, who introduced himself as Haman, lived on the outskirts of Archet. "This is the only stroke of luck in the whole debacle, and that we don't have any further to go. I mean, and excepting meeting yourselves, of course." "Of course," puffed Eberhard as they hauled the wagon from the road onto the track that led to the farm. He and the farmer towed the wagon by its traces while Maglar followed behind, leading Daffodil slowly, his hood again pulled up to hide his face. They were greeted by Halmon's family, who had come running out of the farmhouse to watch the little cavalcade with great curiosity, but politely refrained from personal questions, except for the smallest children. Halbarad tried to answer their questions, but there were a great many of them. "Where do you come from?" "I was born, a little way north." "Can I see your sword?" "No." "Are you a brigand? My ma says there'll be brigands on the road." "There are. You should be careful, but no, we're not highwaymen." "What's wrong with his face? Can he talk?" A small boy with his fingers in his nose pointed at Maglar with his free hand. Halbarad glanced over at his companion, who stood very still, as if afraid that he'd draw attention of the children if he moved a muscle. "He's shy," said Halbarad. "I'm gonna call him Blackbird. He looks like a big crow," said a little girl who was chewing on her braid. "I suppose he does at that," laughed Halbarad, who thought it was a very astute observation. "What's your name?" she asked, grabbing Halbarad's hand with fingers that had recently been in her mouth. He gently extricated his hand, hoping very much that a wash was in its future. "You can call me Hal." A sturdy woman, who could have only been Hamon's wife, rescued them, sending the children scattering. "I'm so sorry. They're little imps, they are. Here, I'll have them draw some water so you can wash up. Give me your salt things. We'll get them clean for you. Have you spares? Ah, no, never mind. I have some old things that will do well now." They were swept away by her efficient hospitality, and soon enough Halbarad and Maglar found themselves directed toward a lean-to stocked with several buckets of cold well water and a sliver of soap. Hal shrugged and stripped down to his underthings without a thought, plunging his arms into the bracing water and splashing it over his chest and face. He wiped the soap from his eyes and glanced at Maglar. "There's room enough." Maglar sniffed. "I'll wait until you're through. You're worse than a pig in a wallow." "Have it your way, but the water will be dirty by the time I'm through." "I'll beg one of the urchins to fill it again. Go on." Halbarad shrugged and carried on, by now well accustomed to Maglar lurking on the fringes of his vision and pretending not to watch him. He changed into the borrowed tunic and trousers, patched and well worn, that the lady of the house had found for them, and found the farmer and his wife in the farmhouse. He was enjoying a mug of Hamon's home-brewed ale when Maglar joined them. His borrowed tunic was a slight too large for him, and his legs stuck out skinny and pale below. He looked strangely unguarded, with neither his hood nor the darkness to hide behind. Halbarad tried not to stare, now that the scar that started above one eyebrow and raked down his cheek, giving a twist to his thin lips, not at the long nose, nor at the two bright eyes. "We don't get many of your folk in these parts," Hamon commented. "Or, leastways, the ones that pass through here keep to themselves. Elves, I mean," he clarified, as if one would have taken Maglar for anything else. He slid a mug of ale over. Maglar accepted the mug without a word. He had stripped off the gloves that he habitually wore. It was only a glimpse, but Halbarad could see the shiny, knotted flesh scarring his palms. He caught him watching and pulled the sleeves over his hands. "Seems to me like you don't particularly want to be known," commented Hamon. "Never fear. I'll not ask you any questions you might not wish to answer. Blackbird's a good name for you as any you were born to." He'd said it casually enough, but it seemed to startle Maglar. I am grateful." The words were gruff, but sincere, and Halbarad nearly fell out of his chair in shock. End of chapter 3. Stay tuned.